In the closing months of 1944, deep in the Pacific Ocean, a single American submarine had become one of the most feared weapons of the United States Navy. Its name was USS Tang, a Balao-class submarine commanded by Lieutenant Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane. By the time her fifth patrol began, Tang had already destroyed more Japanese shipping than any other U.S. submarine of the war. Her record was extraordinary, her crew experienced, and her captain was regarded as one of the finest submarine commanders in the Pacific Fleet. But the story of Tang would end not in triumph, but in one of the most tragic and ironic accidents in naval history. Tang was laid down at Mar Island Navy Yard in California in January 1943 and launched later that same year. She displaced around 1,500 tons submerged, carried 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, and could dive to more than 400 feet. Like other Balao-class boats, she was designed for long-range patrols and aggressive attacks on Japanese shipping lanes that were vital to the enemy's war effort. The submarine service was the smallest branch of the U.S. Navy during the war, but it sank more than half of all Japanese merchant tonnage lost, a remarkable contribution to the Allied victory. Richard O'Kane, Tang's commanding officer, was already a legend before he took command. He had served as executive officer under Dudley "Mush" Morton aboard the USS Wahoo, one of the most daring submarines in the early Pacific campaigns. O'Kane had learned Morton's tactics of close-range nighttime surface attacks and precise torpedo firing. When he received Tang as his own command in October 1943, he brought with him that same aggressive philosophy, one that would make his boat both famous and feared. Tang's first war patrol began late in 1943 in the waters between Truk, the major Japanese base, and the Caroline Islands. O'Kane wasted no time. Within weeks, Tang had sunk multiple cargo ships and tankers, striking at the convoys that supplied Japan's far-flung garrisons. O'Kane's tactic was to attack on the surface at night, using radar to position his boat for the best firing angle. It was dangerous, surfacing within range of Japanese escorts, but it allowed Tang to strike with speed and accuracy before submerging again. By the end of her first patrol, Tang had claimed more than 40,000 tons of enemy shipping. Her second patrol carried her closer to the coast of Japan. Conditions were harsh: freezing water, mechanical strain, and the constant risk of depth charges. Japanese anti-submarine forces had become increasingly skilled, using sonar and aircraft to trap submarines in shallow waters. Yet Tang continued to score victories. She sank a heavily laden freighter off the Ryukyu Islands and a pair of tankers near the East China Sea. Each sinking meant fewer resources for Japan's industry and military operations. O'Kane's reports were concise, his tone professional, but behind every line lay tension, exhaustion, and courage. By March 1944, Tang's reputation was growing rapidly among both allies and enemies. When Tang returned to Pearl Harbor, her crew were celebrated as heroes. But the pace of the Pacific War offered little rest. The submarine was refitted and resupplied for her third patrol, this time into the dangerous waters near Formosa and the South China Sea. These routes were now critical to Japanese logistics. Convoys transported oil, rubber, and raw materials from Southeast Asia to the home islands. To disrupt them was to strangle Japan's ability to continue the war. O'Kane's orders were clear: intercept and destroy as many ships as possible. On this patrol, Tang encountered some of the most intense convoy battles of the submarine campaign. In June 1944, she detected a group of Japanese vessels under heavy escort. O'Kane attacked in rapid succession, firing spreads of torpedoes that struck 2 transports and a tanker. The explosions illuminated the night sea. Fires spread across the waves. But Tang's success drew deadly retaliation. Depth charges rained down, rocking the submarine violently. The pressure hull creaked, light bulbs shattered, and water seeped through valves. The crew held their positions in silence as the boat descended below safe depth, waiting for the barrage to end. After hours of pursuit, the Japanese ships withdrew, believing Tang destroyed. She escaped with minor damage and slipped back into the darkness. Tang's efficiency was not only a matter of skill, but also of technology. She carried the improved Mark 18 and Mark 23 electric torpedoes, as well as the steam-powered Mark 14s. Earlier in the war, the U.S. Navy had suffered from faulty torpedoes that ran too deep, failed to detonate, or circled back. By 1944, most of those issues had been corrected, but not all. The risk of a circular run still existed, though it was rare. For submarine crews, it was a nightmare scenario, the weapon intended for the enemy turning back on its own ship. By her fourth patrol, Tang had become a veteran of the Pacific. O'Kane's command style was calm but demanding. He expected precision and discipline from every man. The crew trusted him completely. They knew that his aggressiveness was balanced by a near-instinctive sense of timing and positioning. In July 1944, Tang patrolled off the coast of Japan itself, sinking ships within sight of land. Each success was a small victory in the broader strategy of blockade and isolation. Japan's merchant fleet was shrinking rapidly, and its ability to supply distant forces in the Philippines and Burma was collapsing. Tang's logbooks recorded tonnages, positions, and times with meticulous detail, but never emotion. The sea, indifferent and vast, swallowed each ship alike. In September 1944, Tang departed Pearl Harbor for her fifth and final patrol. Her target area was the heavily trafficked waters of the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, where remnants of Japan's merchant fleet still attempted to move supplies under constant threat. O'Kane's orders came directly from Commander Submarine Force Pacific: disrupt every convoy possible, regardless of risk. Tang was at the peak of her effectiveness: experienced crew, proven weapons, and a commander whose confidence bordered on fearless. As she approached her patrol zone in mid-October, O'Kane received intelligence about a large convoy evacuating personnel and supplies from the Philippines to Japan. The opportunity was immense. On the night of October 23, 1944, Tang's radar picked up multiple contacts. The convoy consisted of tankers, freighters, and passenger ships, escorted by destroyers. O'Kane maneuvered his submarine to intercept. Under the cover of darkness, he fired his first spread of torpedoes. Two ships exploded almost simultaneously. Flames rose hundreds of feet, and the convoy scattered in confusion. Tang dove to avoid counterattack, enduring another punishing depth charge chase. Hours later, when she surfaced, O'Kane saw burning wrecks drifting across the horizon. For 2 days, Tang hunted the survivors of the convoy. Each contact meant another attack, another explosion, another ship lost. In all, O'Kane's boat destroyed 5 major vessels during that engagement, an extraordinary feat that cemented Tang's reputation as the most successful American submarine of the war. But fate was waiting just beyond the next attack. On the night of October 24-25, Tang encountered another group of enemy ships fleeing the Philippines. The sea was calm, the moon bright. O'Kane ordered surface pursuit, intending to fire his remaining torpedoes. He had only a handful left, just enough to finish the mission before returning home. The crew loaded the tubes, checked bearings, and waited for the command. At 2:30 a.m., Tang launched a spread of 2 torpedoes at a transport. Both hit perfectly. Moments later, she fired again at another target. The torpedo ran hot and straight, vanishing into the night. Then, without warning, a violent explosion rocked the submarine. The blast came not from ahead, but from astern. One of Tang's own torpedoes had malfunctioned, curved in a circular path, and returned to strike her near the stern. The impact was catastrophic. The explosion ripped through the aft compartments, flooding the engine room and killing most of the men there instantly. Tang began to sink by the stern, plunging toward the ocean floor.
O'Kane and the surviving crew fought desperately to stop the flooding, but the damage was too severe. Within seconds, the submarine reached 180 feet, then 200, then 300. The lights flickered out. In the control room, silence fell except for the rushing sound of water. Inside the darkened control room of USS Tang, the surviving crew understood the gravity of their situation. The submarine was sinking fast, stern first, and water pressure increased with every second. Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane ordered emergency ballast blows, but the damage aft made it impossible to regain control. Tang hit the seabed at around 180 feet. The submarine's hull groaned under the immense pressure, and compartments began flooding rapidly. Of the 87 men aboard, many had been killed instantly in the explosion. Those who survived gathered in the forward compartments, trapped in darkness, their boat lying crippled on the bottom of the Taiwan Strait. O'Kane and a handful of men had been thrown overboard when the submarine sank, blasted into the sea by the explosion itself. They clung to floating debris, watching as the water boiled where their ship had disappeared. Inside the wreck, their crewmates faced a desperate choice: suffocate, drown, or attempt an escape through the single functional forward escape trunk.
For the men inside Tang, conditions were unbearable. The air was thick with smoke and oil fumes, and the temperature dropped as cold seawater filled the aft sections. The survivors in the forward torpedo room decided to use the Mumsen lung, a small rebreathing device designed to help submariners ascend from a sunken vessel. It was a grim procedure that few had ever practiced under real conditions. The men knew the risk of lung rupture from rapid ascent, nitrogen narcosis, or drowning, but staying inside meant certain death. Working by flashlight and touch, the crew prepared the escape trunk. They waited for pressure to equalize, each man clutching a Mumsen lung. Then, one by one, they entered the flooded compartment, forcing themselves upward through the narrow tube toward the surface. Of the men who attempted the ascent, only a handful reached open water. Most were overcome by exhaustion, panic, or the effects of rapid decompression. Yet 5 men, including O'Kane himself, who had been thrown clear when the torpedo hit, would eventually be rescued alive. Those 5 survivors found themselves adrift in the Pacific, surrounded by wreckage, oil, and the bodies of their shipmates. They were spotted not by American aircraft, but by Japanese vessels that had witnessed the battle. Captured and taken aboard an escort ship, they were beaten, interrogated, and transported to a prisoner of war camp in Japan. There they learned a cruel truth. Of the 87 men aboard Tang, only 9 had survived the sinking, and 5 of those had been inside the submarine when it went down. The rest were gone, victims of their own weapon. O'Kane spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner, enduring harsh conditions and interrogations. He maintained composure and discipline, refusing to reveal classified information. The Japanese interrogators were astonished by his resolve and the record of his submarine. Tang's final patrol had sunk more enemy ships than any other single patrol of the war, an estimated 33,000 tons destroyed in just a few days. When O'Kane and the surviving crew were liberated after Japan's surrender in 1945, they returned home to a navy that regarded them as heroes. The loss of USS Tang was both tragic and symbolic. It represented the ultimate irony of warfare, destroyed not by the enemy, but by the very weapon she had used so effectively. Investigations after the war confirmed that the cause was a circular-run torpedo, a defect that had plagued American submarines since the beginning of the conflict. Though rare, the malfunction had claimed several boats, including USS Tullabee earlier in the war. The Mark 18 electric torpedo used by Tang was meant to correct earlier flaws, but it still carried the risk of gyro failure, which could send it looping back toward the firing submarine. Despite the tragic end, Tang's legacy was extraordinary. During just 5 patrols, she sank 33 ships, totaling over 116,000 tons of enemy shipping, one of the highest tallies of any Allied submarine. Her captain, Richard O'Kane, was awarded the Medal of Honor for his leadership, courage, and unmatched combat record.
His citation recognized not only his victories, but also his conduct during the loss of his boat and his endurance as a prisoner of war.
Tang's story also highlighted the human dimension of submarine warfare. Life aboard these vessels was a blend of monotony and terror. Crews lived in confined, humid spaces, constantly aware that one depth charge or one mechanical failure could end everything. They slept beside torpedoes, ate quickly prepared meals, and endured weeks without sunlight. Yet they also shared an unbreakable bond. On Tang, that bond was absolute. The survivors later described O'Kane as both stern and deeply loyal, a commander who never asked his men to take a risk he would not take himself. In the broader context of the Pacific War, the submarine campaign was decisive. Though submarines represented less than 2% of the U.S. Navy's personnel, they accounted for more than 55% of all Japanese ships sunk. The campaign effectively strangled Japan's supply lines, cutting off raw materials and fuel from the home islands. It forced the Japanese economy to collapse long before the atomic bombings or the invasion plans came into effect. Tang's patrols were part of that relentless pressure, silent, unseen, and devastatingly effective. After the war, O'Kane continued his naval career and later wrote about his experiences in his memoir, Clear the Bridge. His accounts described not only tactics and operations, but also the camaraderie and sacrifices of the men who served with him. He remained humble about Tang's accomplishments, often emphasizing the teamwork and discipline that made success possible. The submarine, he once said, is the weapon of patience, precision, and silence. Every man aboard is its heartbeat. Today, the name USS Tang lives on. The wreck lies in the Taiwan Strait, at a depth too great for recovery, a tomb for 78 American sailors. In 1951, a new submarine bearing the same name, USS Tang, SS-563, was commissioned in their honor. It carried forward the traditions of skill, innovation, and courage that had defined its predecessor. Monuments at Pearl Harbor and the National Submarine Memorial list Tang among the lost boats of the silent service, a reminder of the extraordinary cost of victory beneath the waves. The irony of Tang's end remains one of the most haunting stories of the Pacific War. A submarine that had destroyed so many enemy vessels met its fate at the hands of its own weapon, a moment that encapsulates both the triumphs and tragedies of technological warfare. Yet beyond the statistics and the irony lies something greater: the courage of men who faced the deep with quiet determination. They fought in darkness, unseen, their victories uncelebrated until long after the war. In the cold silence of the Pacific, USS Tang rests as both legend and warning, a testament to human bravery and the unforgiving nature of war.